When it comes to Bankai in Bleach, they're almost all universally impressive. Many of them are powerful, creative, and really embody the idea of a Shinigami's trump card, their ultimate last resort. However, there are a couple of Bankai that definitely feel as though they fall short by comparison. Komamura's original Kokujo Tengen Myo, Soifon's Jakko Raiko Ben perhaps, or Ikaku's Ryumon Hozaki Maru are just a few that come to mind. And then there's Kensei's Tekken Tachikaze, which sticks out to me as one of the worst, least impressive Bankai of the bunch. But how true is that, really? Is Kensei's Bankai really the worst of them all, or has he just had rotten luck with his opponents? Perhaps both are true. What does Kensei's Bankai actually do, and how does it compare to the other so-called worst Bankai in the series? Well, in today's video, we're going to take a deeper look at Tekken Tachikaze, a Bankai often cited as one of Bleach's worst, even by yours truly, and see if it really does live up to the dubious honour of that title. Let's take a look. Before we get started on the video, guys, consider hitting subscribe down below to help support the growth of the channel. It really does mean a lot, and it does make a huge difference as well. And consider checking out my other channel, Mr. Tomo Talks Games. You can find a link in the description and the pinned comment below to the latest video where we ranked every single boss from Lies of P Overture. It was a really fun video to make. I'm sure some of my takes are going down just wonderfully. Check it out if you haven't done already. If you're into that sort of thing, I really would appreciate the support over there as well. So first of all, before we talk about anything else, what exactly does Kensei's Bankai do? Let's lay it all out on the table. Well, for starters, Kensei Shikai, Tachikaze transforms his Zanpaku toe into a small combat knife with wind-based abilities. When Kensei slashes with his knife, it leaves trails behind in the very air itself, or lacerations you could call them, which Kensei can then detonate in a series of violent explosions, as seen in Turn Back the Pendulum specifically. However, Kensei's Bankai, Tekken Tachikaze, outwardly transforms itself completely, replacing the combat knife with a pair of knuckle blades that Kensei then holds in either hand, while an iron band wraps itself around the entire length of the captain's arms, sweeping overhead in a wide loop before connecting in the middle. Tekken Tachikaze's main ability is to focus all of Tachikaze's explosive power from its Shikai into Kensei's fists. So when Kensei punches something and makes contact with it, his punch releases an explosive force. But the real kicker here is that the explosive force of Kensei's punch will continue to pummel his target over and over again, so long as Kensei's fist remains in contact with the enemy. So, as we see in his battle with Mask Demasculine, by simply landing that one successful punch, Kensei was in actuality able to brutalize Mask with the violent force of endless punches until he sent him flying. And, well, that's really about it. It's certainly not the most detailed or versatile of Bankai, that's for sure, and even this early on into the video, it feels a little simplistic. Don't get me wrong, it's a pretty cool ability, it is fairly creative as well in its own right, but Tekken Tachikaze definitely seems limited, especially in comparison to many of the other Bankai, especially those belonging to captains. Also, as a quick side note, does anyone else think Kubo retconned the look of Kensei's Bankai somewhat between appearances? Because initially, when first used in the Arankar arc, he wields those small knuckle blades, but of course we didn't see him actually use his Bankai at all there. And then in the Thousand Year Blood War arc, Kensei finally gets to show what his Bankai can do, and yet immediately gets rid of the knuckle blades. He immediately transforms them into more orthodox knuckle dusters, which makes total sense since the ability of this Bankai is based squarely around punching. We never see him use the blades. There doesn't seem to be any use for them. I wonder if Kubo originally had a different idea in mind for the Bankai before deciding to focus solely on punching instead, and shows Kensei with the blades very briefly in the Thousand Year Blood War arc just for some form of continuity, just so we didn't go, where are those blades that he had in the Irankar arc? Why is he now just only using knuckle dusters? Anyway, it's a moot point, but I thought it was kind of interesting. So, Tekken Tachikaze has a fairly simple ability, and it doesn't help that Kensei isn't really given any decent opportunities to show off what it can do. As I mentioned, he initially reveals his Bankai back in the fake Karakura Town arc when preparing to fight Wonder Weiss, but whatever fight they have happened entirely off-screen. And not only that, but of the two of them, it's Wonder Weiss who reappears. He reappears to face Yamamoto, seemingly implying he defeated Kensei. Or at the very least, he fled the fight, and Kensei didn't give chase. Then, Kensei next uses his Bankai in the Thousand Year Blood War arc in the second Quincy invasion against Masked Masculine. Here, Mask has already defeated Hisagi, Ikaku, and Yumichika, and so Kensei steps in to rescue his vice-captain. Activating his Bankai after a pretty long wait, we finally get to see what it can do. Kensei lands a huge punch in Mask's gut, and then releases the power of his Bankai upon connecting with a second punch, with Mask being battered by a never-ending flurry of explosive strikes before Kensei sends him flying into a building. And yeah, for a moment at least, it looks like Mask has been taken down. However, the Stern Ritter is revived via the power of the Superstar, and from this point onwards just completely overwhelms Kensei's Bankai. At one point, Kensei does manage to transform his knuckle dusters again. Now they have more pronounced prongs, and launches another attack on Mask, and it kind of looks like maybe he's overpowering him a second time, but once James cheers for the Stern Ritter again, Kensei's Bankai, it is totally nullified. This seems to be its ceiling. We don't know what Kensei actually does when he changes up his knuckle dusters here, but I mean, it's a fairly safe assumption. It's fairly safe to assume he's either strengthening the explosive power of his Bankai, or maybe just kind of concentrating it onto a more narrow point even further. If we imagine the initial knuckle dusters he creates spreads out the surface area of those explosive punches, by creating these thinner prongs, he is narrowing that surface area even further, implying the prongs maybe deal out even more punches than before. That's purely speculation. Either way, he doesn't achieve anything with it, and Mask brutally overpowers him. What's crazy about this sequence, particularly in the manga, though it does occur as well in the anime, and honestly it seems to have gone totally overlooked by most people, including maybe even the anime team themselves, is that Kensei's Bankai is completely destroyed here. You can see as he lies unconscious on the floor that the iron band behind him has been ripped in two. And if we go by the new lore introduced in this very arc, that should mean that Kensei's Bankai is now either unusable, or at the very least considerably permanently weakened. And yet, in the anime, Kensei uses his Bankai again mere hours later to pummel Pepe, seemingly with no ill effects. And I imagine, though this is just a guess, that we might see him use it again against Gerard too. Speaking of which, though I got slightly ahead of myself, the anime does change up the scene of Pepe's defeat. In the manga, the zombified Kensei does beat the Stern Ritter to a pulp with his bare hands. But here in the anime, for some reason, they've opted to have Kensei use his Bankai again, I guess to just give it another showing perhaps. But in my opinion, this does two things. It actually makes Pepe, of all characters, look slightly better, and it makes Tekken Tachikaze look even worse at the same time. Pepe is absolutely hammered by Kensei's Bankai here, and yet when he emerges from the rubble, he's basically unharmed. This made a little more sense in the manga, as a Stern Ritter would likely be mostly okay after being pummeled by a captain's bare hands like that, even if it is Kensei, but by a captain's Bankai? And a Bankai that specializes in punching people. Yeah, that makes Tekken Tachikaze look pretty weak, I've got to be honest. It feels like a significant downgrade. But maybe it's weak because it was broken in the battle with Mask after all. We've got no idea. So I mean, that's really it for how Kensei's Bankai is used in the series, but there's actually one final piece of information I'd like to discuss, one that isn't mentioned or revealed in the series at all. In the episode guide booklet that comes packaged with the Core 2 Blu-ray, in an interview with Taguchi discussing Kensei's Bankai as it makes its appearance in this core, he notes that he envisioned Kensei's power as him delivering tens of thousands of punches. Tens of thousands! If Kensei really hit Mask and Pepe tens of thousands of times, like, I can't overemphasize how absurdly high a number of hits that really is, then not only are those two characters extremely durable, but, I mean, Kensei's punches, or at the very least the explosive punch effect of his Bankai, must be insanely weak to account for tens of thousands of hits. I guess to be totally fair, it's not really the same where Pepe is concerned, as, at least from what we see, Kensei never quite leaves his fist in contact with Pepe long enough to presumably get the burst effect. So where Pepe is concerned, he's just being punched over and over again, though you could still assume, I think, that Kensei's punches should at least be augmented by his Bankai to some degree, but, you know, in the sake of fairness, it is different, I think, to how Kensei fights Mask, in that he actually uses the ability of his Bankai, but this is still relevant for where Mask is concerned. The irony of this statement is that the larger the number they give, the more diluted the power and effectiveness of this Bankai actually is, at least in our eyes. But that's it for every instance of Kensei's Bankai that we've seen so far. Like I said, it's not a great showing, but then Kensei isn't the only character whose Bankai showings haven't been exactly stellar. So how does it compare to some of those? Well, when compared with many of the so-called worst Bankai of Bleach, I actually don't think Tekken Tachikaze comes out looking too terrible, believe it or not. I mean, who are considered to be the worst? Obviously, many older Bankai, like Renji's immensely cumbersome and frankly useless Hihio Zabimaru, or even Ikkaku's Ryumon Hozokimaru, that was irreparably damaged in battle against a Fraction. Now, I don't for a moment believe that Kubo had thought of the idea of broken Bankai never being able to be repaired back during Ikkaku's battle with Edrad, and the damage done to Ryumon Hozokimaru was likely just going to be fixed the next time we saw the Bankai in action. But when the Thousand Year Blood War arc came around, and Kubo wanted Ichigo's broken Tensei Zangetsu to be a major plot point, well, I mean, there was really no way of writing around the state of Ikkaku's Bankai, and so he was kind of sacrificed at the altar of Ichigo's development. But yeah, I mean, knowing what we do now, Ikkaku's Bankai looks pretty bad in hindsight. Whereas Komamura's Bankai is the total opposite in my opinion. This huge, lumbering soldier used to be universally considered one of the worst Bankai in the series. It was massively cumbersome, it was unbelievably vulnerable, and in some sense that's all still true. However, in light of the revelation that Komamura's Bankai is the only Bankai, the only one in the series that can mend itself due to its connection to Komamura, the Bankai received an enormous buff as far as I'm concerned. Like, that is something that no other Bankai in the series can do. It's the opposite of the situation with Ikkaku. Kubo basically chose Komamura to receive this wondrous advantage, while leaving poor Ikkaku out in the cold. And it kind of makes sense. There was no way both characters could miraculously fix their previously busted Bankai in the wake of this new lore revelation. And considering Komamura's innate link to the giant soldier itself, it ultimately does make a lot of sense to go with him. And so as a result, I think Komamura's Bankai is nowadays actually weirdly kind of good. Or at the very least, it is way less risky to use than every other Bankai in the series. Soifon's Bankai is another interesting one. Again, it used to be considered pretty bad, mostly due to the incredible amount of preparation she needed to use it, how much energy it required of her to get off even a single shot, and how it seemed totally antithetical to her preferred method of fighting. But the results are pretty clear to see when she actually lands a hit. Both Barragan and BG9 had gigantic chunks blown out of their heads, and while she didn't manage to kill either of them, which I think is a bit of a sore spot, I definitely think BG9 at least have died, these were substantial injuries that changed the course of the battle. Putting it simply, Soifon hitting BG9 with her Bankai did way more, measurably more, than Kensei hitting either Mask or Pepe for even a prolonged amount of time. And sure, the realities of their two Bankai are totally different, but I mean, I know which one I think is more impressive at the end of the day. So look, as we come to the end of this video, let's get down to brass tacks here. Is Tekken Tachikaze the worst Bankai in Bleach? I think it's pretty close. I really do. Sure, Kensei has fought some tough opponents. In general, the Sternritter are no joke, but a lot of characters in the Thousand Year Blood War arc used Bankai in the battle with the Sternritter, and frankly, a lot of them were more impressive, or at least had the capacity to be more impressive. You know, like Rose's Kinshara Butodan, for example, was used in the same fight as Kensei's Tekken Tachikaze, and really was just as useless. And yet, you don't hear anyone saying that Kinshara Butodan is one of the worst Bankai around. Why is that? The reason for that is it doesn't take a genius to look at Rose's Bankai and the circumstances around it and what it does, what it could do, and think actually that has the potential to be an extremely powerful, extremely deadly Bankai. Rose should have kept his mouth shut, everyone agrees on that, but also how many characters in Bleach are realistically going to crush their own eardrums without hesitation in order to counter it? There's just much more going on with Kinshara Butodan than there is with Tekken Tachikaze, even if they both had, relatively speaking, pretty bad showings. But being totally fair, while I do think Kensei's Bankai is one of the worst of the bunch, I can't in good conscience call it the absolute worst. I think Renji's original Hihio Zabimaru is worse, being a gigantic, unwieldy mess that's really good for nothing, and again was also destroyed in battle against a Fraxione, though luckily for Renji his Bankai was so big it didn't need to be fully intact to work. And I think probably the single worst Bankai in Bleach has to be Ikkaku's Ryumon Hozokimaru, even before it was trashed beyond repair. By design, Ikkaku's Bankai doesn't even use its full strength initially, as Ikkaku needs to wake it up first, a flaw born out of Ikkaku's own innate desire to drag fights out for as long as he can. But yeah, I mean, alongside that, Ryumon Hozokimaru doesn't really have any special abilities, so to speak of, aside from, I guess, immense physical strength. And the fact that if he spins the blade, he can kind of build up its power, but even that kind of feels like a weakness if you come up against an enemy who doesn't just stand there and let you do that. I mean, you have to try and build up and wake up your Bankai's power, when, as a Shinigami's last resort, it should be available to you like that. What good is it otherwise? And, on the opposite end of the spectrum, it was clearly pathetically brittle if a Fraxione was able to totally demolish it. Ikkaku's entire blade is gone. And again, as I said, we have to look at it through the lens of our current knowledge, unfortunately for Ikkaku. Like I noted, I do not believe this was the original plan for how Bankai worked, meaning back in the day, Ikaku's Bankai breaking against Edrad didn't really mean anything. There were no real consequences for that. Most of us expected that after a little bit of time, Ryumon Hozokimaru would be back to fighting form. Now, though, it being broken like that is a huge red flag and a massive downgrade. So yeah, I think Ryumon Hozokimaru was, and certainly now is, comfortably the worst Bankai in Bleach, which is a shame as well, as I think it looks awesome. It looks way cooler than Tekken Tachikaze, at least in my opinion, but Tekken Tachikaze isn't exactly great either. Alright everyone, but that's it for today's video, looking at Kensei Muguruma's Bankai Tekken Tachikaze and asking the question, is this the worst Bankai in Bleach? I'd love to get your thoughts and consensus on this down in the comments. Am I right in that while this isn't the worst, it is pretty close to the bottom of the list, I think, for the reasons I talked about above? Or am I totally off base here? I'd love to get all of your thoughts down in the comments below, so do please let me know. What do you think, capability-wise, is the worst Bankai in Bleach? Am I right? Is it Ikaku's Bankai? Maybe you think it's Renji's old Bankai, or something totally different? Do let me know down in the comments. I'd love to read them. Alright everyone, once again, thank you so very much for watching. As always, consider hitting subscribe down below if you haven't done already. Check out Mr. Tomo Talks Games. Give us some support over there. Again, it would be massively appreciated. And speaking of massively appreciated, a huge everlasting thank you goes out to my wonderful supporters over on Patreon. Each and every one of you helps to make this channel a reality, as really with the way YouTube is at the moment, this probably wouldn't be possible, at least not to this degree, without your support. Your support does make all the difference, and massive thank you goes out to everyone who watched, of course, but especially to those people listed in the credits who do support this channel that extra step. It does mean the absolute world to me. Alright everyone, once again, thank you so very much for watching. Until next time, I'll catch you later, and I'll see you then.